In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to colour in your stamps using Promarkers by blending similar shades together so that you get a really nice professional effect like the little fairy that you can see in front of you. Now obviously, the colours that we've used here are shades of ivory and brown, which give you a lovely vintage effect, but do remember that you can use any similar shades together and get the same result just by doing exactly what I'm going to show you how to do here. So, let's get started. First of all, I'll show you the colours that you're going to need if you want to do this project, which are here. Now these are the Promarker colours that you'll need, and these are the Copic Chow colours that you need, and obviously they correspond. So for the ivory you'll use the E50, sandstone E43, etc. So I'll just leave that for a second and you can see the colours that you're going to need. Right, so let's get started. Now first of all, I'm just going to put down a little bit of scrap paper because the Promarkers do bleed through, so you just want to protect the surface that you're working on. Now I've stamped my image and I've used a Memento ink pad because this is a dye-based ink pad, and it means when you're using your Promarkers, the ink of the ink pad won't run, so you'll keep a nice crisp image. So I'm going to start colouring her in now. Now the key when you're blending with the Promarkers is to put down the palest colour first. So colouring in her dress, I've got ivory first, and I'm just going to colour in her top. Now, when you're using the Promarkers, the key is to make sure that you keep the area flooded with colour, so don't skimp on how much colour you put down. Make sure that it's really nice and evenly spread throughout. Now at the bottom of her top, I've just left a little bit of white, which is where I'm going to put the sandstone, which is the darker colour. So I'm just going to add that in at the bottom. Now you don't have to worry about being precise or anything, just make sure that you do it while the ivory colour is still wet, so you've got to do it within 2 or 3 minutes. And now I've put that in, I've got my ivory again, and I'm just going to go over the join where the two colours meet with the ivory, and they will then just blend together. Now if you're worrying that the ivory is going to pick up the colour, it doesn't at all. It doesn't ever pick up the darker colour, but it does make them blend nicely together. So now I've done that, I'm going to move on to her skirt, and again I'm putting the ivory down first because that's the palest one, and again I'm working really well over the area to make sure that the colour is really well into the design and nice and even. And again I've left a white bit at the bottom, which is where the sandstone's going to go, which I'm now going to put in. Now you may be thinking this looks darker than the original image, but once it's dry it will go a lot paler. When you use the Promarkers, they're a lot darker when they're wet, and then once they've dried they end up much paler. So again, now I've put the sandstone down, I'm just going over the join between the two colours with the ivory until it's all nice and blended like that. Now for the underside of her skirt, again I've got my ivory. This time I'm doing it on the outside edge so that I can put the sandstone further in, which is where in real life her skirt would be a bit darker. Again, over the join with the ivory. And then just for a bit of added depth, I've got warm grey 5, and I'm just going to put a tiny little bit of this right inside her skirt there. Then I'm going to blend that with the sandstone, and then I'm going to blend all of that with the ivory. Now again, you might be thinking it looks too dark, but honestly once it's dried it'll be great. So that's her dress done, and again now I'm going to do her shoes, which is exactly the same for her shoes. Put the ivory on first, which is the pale one, and then I'm going to get the sandstone and just put that down the underside of her shoes where there would be more natural shading, and then over again with the ivory so that they're all nice and soft edges. And then to finish off, she just needs some little socks, and I'm just going to do the sandstone and the ivory there. Now you can probably see I'm not being too precise with this, but the good thing with our stamps is You don't have to worry about it because they're quite sketchy images in the first place. You really don't need to worry about being too precise, because if you go over the lines a bit or anything, it does add to the sort of like finished sketchy effect. I'm going to do a wings now. So again, working in sections, I'm putting the ivory down first, and then I'm just going to put the sandstone, the inner bit of the wing there, and again blend with the ivory. Now if you're wondering why I'm doing it in sections, it's because if you did it all together you run the risk of the darker bits of one part of the wing bleeding into the paler bits of another part of the wing. Whereas if you do them in separate sections, that's not going to happen, so you get a much cleaner effect, which is what you want at the end. Again, bit of sandstone, and then go over again with the ivory, like that. Put that there. And then for this little bit, I'm just going to colour that in the darker sandstone. And that is her coloured in, and that is basically the fundamentals of blending. I will just now do her skin and her hair so that you can see how that works, and then she's finished. Doing her skin's really simple. Again, I'm just using blush first, which is going to go down as the base colour of her skin. Don't worry, again, you might think, oh, it looks a bit dark, but remember, once it dries, this is a really lovely pale skin colour. And then while that is still wet, I've got soft peach, which I'm going to put for her cheeks. And I'm just going to pat on a little bit there and just leave that alone. And as it dries, it will bleed into the blush colour and you'll get a really nice finished effect. And then to do her hair, I could do it a different colour, and obviously you can do that if you want, but especially when I'm doing vintage designs, I do like to keep it with only one or two colours so that you really get that nice sepia effect. So I'm putting the ivory that we did her dress in down for her hair, and then again I'm going to get sandstone and just run a little bit of that where it would naturally be darker on parts of her hair. Then again, over the join where the colours meet with the ivory, so that they bleed together, and you get a nice finished effect. And then just to finish off, again keeping the colours all similar, I'm using the soft peach, which we use for her cheeks, to colour in these flowers, so that you're keeping the really nice soft gentle colour palette without there being too much going on. I'll colour these flowers in as well with that. And then just to finish off, I'll colour these leaves in. Again, because we're working with a nice muted vintage palette, I don't want too much of a garish kind of green. So I've got pear green here, which is bright but quite muted at the same time. And that will complement the vintage beiges for colour. Just colour in these leaves, put in the stalks. Again, I'm not worrying about being too precise because it all adds to the sketchiness of the stamp. Scribble a little bit of green under her feet. And then just for an added bit of extra depth, I'm going to finish with marsh green. Again, while the ink's still wet, run it under the underside of the leaves where you get a natural bit of shading, little bits on the grass, and they will bleed nicely into there. And that is how you use your Promarkers to blend similar colours together to finish off your stamps.